Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Institut Français today for this special event. I am Isabelle Mancy, cultural attachée at the Institut Français du Royaume-Uni. I am extremely happy to present the 4th edition of Art Matters, a new series of conversations about art, initiated and produced by the Institut Français. The two-day conversation reading is also part of the first edition of the festival Women Shaping the World and Le Mois de la Francophonie. Art is a seismograph of society. It helps us to understand the world we live in. The previous sessions of Art Matters have been dedicated to post-colonialism, environmental issues, the national pavilions of the Venice Biennale with the invitation of Sonia Boyce and Zineb Zedira. Tonight, we have the great pleasure to discuss about the voice of women, the voice of Clara Schulmann, author, curator, teacher at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts de Paris, the author of the book Zizanies, from which the conversation will begin this evening. The discussion will start about the experience of own voice, its fragility, its intermittency, a voice that she cannot totally control, that she do not want totally control. And of course, she assumes it. And this conversation led by Lauren Elkin, writer and translator, who is herself preparing a book on the singing voices. We will also discuss the voices of Clara's friends, writers, philosophers, and directors who have inspired her. This conversation will also be about translation. Indeed, Zizanies, published in French by Paraguay Press, Thomas Boutou, which we are lucky to have with us this evening, is currently being translated. It will be published in the UK next October by the publisher Les Fugitives on the initiative of its driving force, Cécile Limenon, whom we are also pleased to welcome this evening. Cécile has proposed an almost conceptual project for the translation of Zizanies. She asked as many translators at their chapters in Zizanies to translate it, a polyphonic translation as is the book itself. So tonight we will hear 3 of these translators read in English from excerpts they have chosen themselves. We are delighted to welcome Natasha Lehrer, writer, translator, and editor, Jenny Higgins, literary translator from French and Italian, and in the absence of Naima Rashid, writer, poet, and literary translator, Cécile Limenon has accepted to read an extract from Naima's translation. In the Q&A afterwards, your questions could be addressed to the wonderful 5 women we will have the pleasure of listening tonight, and to Thomas Boutou, the great French editor of Zizanies. Thomas is art critic, curator, and professor à l'École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts de Lyon. Before I give the floor to Clara and to Lauren, I would like to thank our public and private partners without whom this conversation would not have existed. The French Institute, the French Ministry of Culture, the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, Les Fugitives, Paraguay Press, and the Banque Transatlantique, who are supporting us for this evening. It is a pleasure to have you all with us this evening. Clara and Lauren, I will leave you the stage. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. So is this good? This is working? Cool. Sound check, on direct. So this is very cool. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you to Clara and to Thomas for coming over from Paris, and thank you to the French Institute for organizing. Thank you to Cécile for having this mad idea of having so many translators be involved. I'm very stoked to be taking part. Yeah, I prepared a couple of things by way of introduction to the book, just so we can all kind of, find our way in, and then Clara and I will talk for a bit, and then I'm really eager to hear, what everyone thinks of all the stuff that we've been talking about, and there are people at home, I think, right? Are they going to be able to send in questions too? Hopefully, we'll see. Not sure. Well, they'll send them to them, and they'll send this over to us. So I'm going to start with a quote by Anne Carson. You quote Anne Carson at I think at least one point, maybe several points during the book, who's written just a foundational essay on this question of gender and specifically the female gender and voice, called The Gender of Sound. So I'm just going to read this. She writes, quote, "It is in large part according to the sounds that people make that we judge them, sane or insane, male or female," very binary, male, female, or other, I would add, or in between or non-binary, "good, evil, trustworthy, depressive, marriageable, moribund, likely or unlikely to make war on us, little better than animals, inspired by God," end quote. So there's something about the voice, clearly, that makes people associate it, rightly or wrongly, with agency, with authenticity. We talk about it being important to have a voice, to find one's voice, especially, as a writer. That's a very particular thing, platitude that people like to hurl at you. So what this has meant for women in particular is a rich and inviting subject, and sometimes a frustrating one, and one that I think requires a certain subtlety of mind and approach and an openness to hearing other voices. And I think this is something that Clara does really beautifully in her book. I have one more quote from Anne Carson, and then I will get over to Clara. She writes specifically about women, quote, "High vocal pitch goes together with talkativeness to characterize a person who is deviant from or deficient in the masculine idea of self-control. Women, catamines, eunuchs, and androgynes fall into this category. Their sounds are bad to hear and make men uncomfortable," end quote. So what we do with our voices and what it means socially and how those two things are kind of constantly co-creating and reifying and, veering off course and all of that is something that Clara does in this book, I think, really, really fascinatingly. This is a book about the body, about the way that it contains, produces, limits, supports, deranges, and unleashes the voice. It's about the voice in imperfection, about the voice in a hurry, about irritation, different moments, different tempos. It's a book that, my section of translating is about the breath, and I find that it's a book that really takes its time, takes a breath, like it's in kind of fragmentary sections. It's not trying to do too much, and yet it does quite a lot. So I think that's a really amazing feat. So chapeau to Clara. So I thought maybe an interesting point to begin tonight would be where you begin in the book, which is not actually with the voice, but it's with a journey. Something happens to you in your life and you go on a trip, and that's the kind of entryway in. I wonder, how do questions of the voice emerge from this starting point of exhaustion and disappointment and displacement?
Okay, that's a huge question, but that's an interesting one. And let me thank, first of all, everyone who come here tonight. It's a very moving moment for me, because when I was writing Zizanies, I could have never imagined, never in my life, that I would be one evening like that in London, talking in English about something I wrote, and finally exist in a way now in French and in the future in English. So for me, it's a very amazing adventure. And I have so many persons I want to thank for that. Obviously, Thomas is the first one I want to thank for that, and he's here tonight, and he's my French publisher. And as Lauren said, Cécile has had this beautiful and mad idea of translating Zizanies the way we are working on it right now. It means that so many other voices by other women are looking at this text and finding their own way inside this translation work. I want to thank Isabelle, obviously, because she was very committed in this invitation, and she seems to like the book. I don't know why exactly, but I'm very moved that she... No, that's great, and thank you all of you for coming here tonight. So, I don't remember your question. Yes, how the book begins, and it doesn't begin with the voice, that's true. Now that I have completed the book and that I have to reread it because I have to speak about it and give ideas about the way I wrote, and it is always difficult because when you write something, you don't always follow an exact idea, you follow different kind of ideas. But now that I look at it, I know quite clearly that it has, and it's not the most joyous way of talking about the book, but I think it's a book about separation. And at the beginning of the book, I say and I tell the story of two big moments in my life that have been two different separations, very, very common separations. I mean, it has nothing very singular or special about it. I mean, these are very common and, I mean, almost quotidian experiences. One is a breakup, a love breakup. You say that? Well, yes, okay. And the other one is the fact that I lost a job I really liked at the time, which was I was a teacher in an art school in Bordeaux, and the contract ended a bit abruptly last day. So the book begins by these two separations, which are very different kind of experiences, but in the end, these two separations that I had to make, I think what the book is trying to do is to build the invisible community of voices I needed at the time, and I still do, I think, to be able to go through this kind of separation, which were on the one hand an affective one, and on another hand an affective one too. I mean, profession, as we all know, and work has always to do with what we, I mean, kind of affective impulses, no? So, the book begins by telling very quickly, I want to say that, don't be worried, I mean, I don't spend lots of time telling about my breakups, but anyway, very quickly that the question of separations and how I tried to deal with it is at the core of the book. And then the question was, and still is, I think, how and what kind of links and what kind of ties you can build with your own hands, and in my case with my own ears, to be able to go through the difficulty and the abruptness and the brutality, in a way, of a separation. So voices were the net, no, c'est possible? The net I chose to be able to go through these two very important moments of my life, I think. So voices came in my case, and that's what I wanted to, and the book is about that in a way, to repair something maybe. So, I mean, separation is at the beginning of the book, but then what happens, and what I wanted to tell, and what the stories I wanted to tell are the stories these voices are about. So, obviously, in my case, links and ties, and even the weakest links are much more important in a way than to talk about separation and something too tragic or too dramatic in a way. I don't know if you follow me, and I really don't know if my English is good enough. Okay, Cécile makes that.
It's wonderful.
Thank you, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it an answer to your question?
Yeah, completely. And yeah, I wrote down voice as reparative. And here I'm going to get into a little bit of trouble because I've got notes from the book in French because I don't know how, the other translators are rendering all of this. So, I'm going to approximate, but, if this is your section, just chime in. So this friend who you go and see in the mountain.
Yes, I go to the mountain. Oh, yes, there's a travel. You wanted to, yeah.
But she says something interesting. She says, les voix font le lien entre l'extérieur et l'intérieur. Yes. So the voice itself is a link between inside and outside, and that's why they're fragile. They're at the same time private, domestic, and public. Yes. So, that the voice itself is some kind of connective tissue between areas of our life that we tend to think of as
exactly,
as really
but that's exactly the whole point, and that's what I'm experiencing right now. I have this bad cough, coming from really deep inside, I think. So what you're experiencing when I cough, I think, is exactly the relation between an inside full of anxiety, obviously, and the inside of this social event we have to carry on. I mean, we have to, and that's exactly the whole point of voices, this very precise moment of fragility we all have to deal with every day, I think, which is the link between, and that's the air we breathe, and that's how the voices react to these special moments when they have to carry the weight of what it takes to engage socially, which also means, of course, what it takes to engage politically. So that's, I think, what I'm trying to do with voices.
How can we reconcile then, like, the fragility of the voice with all the things that we're expected to do with it and manifest with it?
To be very honest, there's no reconciliation and there's no way out, and there's no solution, in my opinion. But that's a very maybe
to reconcile ourselves to non-reconciliation.
Yeah, that's it. That. But what is interesting is that I think what is interesting is the fact. My feeling is that for a few years now, I have the feeling that a lot of people are trying to share and invent together and describe and identify quite precisely the moments I'm talking about, trying to put it in common in a way. So there's no reconciliation, I think, and there's no solution, but my opinion and my optimism come from the fact that I feel that we are going through times where there are common places where this fragility can be discussed, and this is a very good news.
Maybe that's a good point to have the first reading from the book. Yeah? What do you think? I think you're reading from the introduction at any rate, so, you know.
So I'm reading from the preface, which is a sample from the preface 10 pages in, and this is a translation by Naima Rashid, who unfortunately can't be with us today. Before I start, just very quickly, I don't know why everybody keeps saying that I had this mad idea. It's one of the best ideas I've had since the idea of founding Les Fugitives, I would say. So I think, well, great. And it was the only possible way for this book to exist in English as well. Anyway, so Clara says, "The way we think out loud is at the heart of this book. In this category, I loosely place teaching, conferences, interviews, discussions, radio, telephone, and psychoanalysis. Even though I grew up in a family where we spoke a lot, sometimes in a very heated manner, the studies I spent so long pursuing have progressively pushed me to favor writing. The situation is quite common. In fact, it's striking in interviews, especially the ones with theorists. When these women speak, they translate their academic language, a written code, into a common and shared spoken language. One gets to hear the mutations of their voice, the way it becomes charged with emotions or turns cold, inflections which are never accessible while reading. Our states of tiredness, irritation, and joy color our voices, and this color goes on to change the words, the pauses, and the silences. It was at the time I started teaching 7 years ago that these nuances first became apparent to me. The effects, the varying intensities, the clumsiness or the failures of the spoken word, but also its capacity to capture the present. Today, I think it is a medium which allows one to undo the knowledge of one's position of power and authority by subjecting it to the ordinary climate of every day, normal or abnormal, with its hazards, its surprises, or, on the contrary, its moroseness. I remember a poetry initiative which we started in February 2017 in Bordeaux in an artistic practice workshop, of which all 4 of us were in charge, including the 2 Benjamins and Armand. The Love All Day Marathon, as we called it in the emails we exchanged, proposed to students to show up that day with some songs, poems, writings on love. We specified further. You can bring writings, songs, books, files that you have written, created, or that you can find. We will work together with these writings. Our idea was to read out loud, to hear our own voices and possibly to record each other during readings. Pedagogically, we were convinced that the very act of speaking could stimulate poetic writing. We debated among ourselves how to word the invitation. Finally, Benjamin summed up the activity in an email. No more and no less, and that is good enough as it is, no one enter who is not a surveyor of love, with their stock of words, etc. Respects, serenades, and bewitching sonatas. Basically a simple announcement email, one request, bring a pen and some apples to share. The morning of the day itself, we stopped by the school library to pick up some books which we placed on the table in this small room, number 226, whose windows overlooked the music conservatory. As far as I remember, our poetry day wasn't a resounding success. Some students made the effort and came to read some pieces with us, but their presence, their attention, and moreover, their participation seemed uncertain. I can't get the idea out of my head that it was the very act of reading aloud which was weighing them down, embarrassing them, as if it exposed them in a peculiar way. That said, by the end of the day, Benjamin and I received an email from Barbara, who was never verbose, but who came that day nonetheless to recite some English poems by Victor Hugo. Tomorrow at Dawn, titled Poetry Stuff. The email contained, the poem by Hugo was Tomorrow at Demain à l'aube. Titled Poetry Stuff, the email contained a link to a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, an American poet whom I'd never heard of. Time does not bring relief. You all have lied, who told me time would ease me of my pain. I miss him in the weeping of the rain. I want him at the shrinking of the tide. Teaching remains an experience of delay, or rather a non-convergence of voices. The idea of a result is constantly rooted here by this shapeless drifting of days and hours spent together without anything happening in the real sense of the word. To be able to add one's voice to this flow and act as if it still amounts to something is the overarching narrative that one has to succeed in telling oneself. If I was ever able to do it, it was because my voice in Bordeaux was in particularly good company. The chapters of this book naturally order themselves into a regular chronicle in which events from my life are placed next to readings, films, stories that were told to me, discussions I was part of, interventions and works which fed into this research. Their arrangement in 6 parts allows different spiritual states, moments, and tempos to appear. The word moment is grey, dull, and relatively vague. This imprecision characterizes time which is lived from moment to moment, time which we no longer question because it blends so seamlessly into the everyday. Indefinite, but with a cadence at its core. This lived time traps us as much as it sets us free. In the course of a day, or even a single hour, we pass through a lot of different moments. Sometimes they even overlap. I see them as seasons and cycles, which affect our gestures, our bodies, and the words we use. We cannot define a moment. We can, however, ask ourselves what is inside of it, much like we search the inside of a bag.
Do you want me to read really in French, the French version of it? Should I do it?
Could read like a tiny bit.
A tiny bit, okay. No, because I was thinking maybe it's too long, it's going to be a short, okay. La façon dont on pense à voix haute est au cœur de ce livre. J'y range en vrac l'enseignement, les conférences, les entretiens, les discussions, la radio, le téléphone, l'analyse psychanalytique. Même si j'ai grandi dans une famille où on parle beaucoup, parfois de façon enflammée, les études très longues que j'ai faites m'ont progressivement poussée à favoriser l'écrit. Cette situation est en fait très commune, c'est frappant dans les entretiens, notamment avec des théoriciennes. Lorsqu'elles parlent, elles traduisent leur langue académique, l'écrit, dans la langue commune et partagée, orale. On entend alors les mutations de leur voix, la façon dont elles se chargent d'émotions ou se refroidit, des inflexions qui ne sont jamais accessibles à la lecture. Nos états de fatigue, d'irritation, de joie colorent nos voix, et cette coloration vient modifier les mots, les pauses, les silences. C'est au moment où j'ai commencé à enseigner il y a 7 ans que ces nuances me sont apparues, les effets, les intensités, les maladresses ou les ratages de l'oralité, mais aussi sa capacité à attraper le présent. Aujourd'hui, j'y pense comme à un médium qui permet de défaire le savoir de sa position de pouvoir et d'autorité en le soumettant au climat ordinaire, normal ou anormal de tous les jours, avec ses aléas, ses surprises ou au contraire sa morosité.
Okay, thank you. It is really such a cool project to have so many different people translating, because as I was listening to you read, Cécile, I was thinking of how, I think Naima's obviously done a wonderful job, but her voice doing your voice is different to my voice doing your voice. It's like we're all hearing different intonations or something. It's such a cool project. And I mean, in the past when I've collaborated on translations, it's usually only 2 people, and you kind of go back over each other's work to make sure it's like kind of uniform-ish. But I love that it's like kind of this, Bactinian polyphony, like different voices jutting out. I think it's going to be fantastic. So yeah, something that's in that section that I think is really key, the section that Cécile just read for us, Naima's section, that I think is really key to the book and to the way that you write, the way that you construct this sort of interrogation of the voice. I just wrote down a quick phrase: to add one's voice to the flow. And you add your voice to this flow of different writers, all feminist, all female, like Denise Riley, Anne Carson, Anne Doane, Lisa Robertson, Moira Davey, Deborah Levy, all like fantastic, amazing, wonderful people. I wonder, do you think of citation as a feminist practice? How is this functioning for you, this kind of chorus of voices?
The answer is obviously yes, of course. I wouldn't have used so many quotes if I wouldn't think that's, for me, it's the most Romanesque way of working, I think, because it's all about attachment and links and ties, of course. And it's feminist mainly because it's a way to choose your own genealogy in a way, to say where you come from, and for me, it's a very fair and transparent way of saying and describing this genealogy. And I think the whole project of the book was to try and describe where I have the feeling, where I belong in a way. So, yes, I would say yes, it's a feminist practice.
Can you say something about the feminist chorus that you organize at one point in the book around the work of Laura Mulvey?
Oh, yes, I can. Yes, I can. Oh, wow. Yes, that's a beautiful memory. I was, actually, I've been in touch with Laura Mulvey for years now because I've been translating her essays, not translating, but editing her essay, the translation of her essays into French. So we've been in touch for a while now, and I have co-organized her venue in Paris, and the idea was to, of course, have a symposium, a journée d'études around her work. So we had invited so many searchers and teachers and students to speak about her work. But we also had invited, that's amazing, I'm forgetting her name, Lucy? Oh, shit. Lucy Reynolds, the artist, the British artist. Okay, I'm so sorry to have forgotten the name. And Lucy organizes these choruses. That's one of her one of her main artistic production. And her idea was to organize a course around Laura. So the idea was that we invited she had decided of 3 categories: the readers, the makers, and the viewers. And we had to recruit so many persons to be part of these different groups. So we had recruited readers and makers and viewers, and this person had to be part of a group that were reading texts by Laura Mulvey in the dark, in a movie theater, just with their phone, the light of their phone open, you see, right before or after the screening of different films Laura had chosen. I mean, it's a bit, it looked like a difficult operation, but in the end it was quite easy. And they were reading all aloud and together. So we had all these different women from different ages, different generations, artists, students, filmmakers too, gathered around these texts that Lucy had chosen, written by Laura, and reading all them aloud. And it was, yes, it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. That it's true. I keep forgetting what's in the book. I know Cécile is always a bit worried about me, and she's right. And but I forgot that this feminist chorus is at the end of a chapter. That's the chapter you're translating?
No,
not at all.
I'm doing the breath one. I don't know who's doing this chapter.
Okay.
But yeah, you say il s'agit plutôt d'inventer une voix collective et une cacophonie de sons féministes. So a collective voice, a cacophony of feminist voices. I mean, there's, you know, we're I think in the blurb for tonight, it's something about theory, like French theory now. And, you know, I have, as a one-time academic, a recovering academic, I have to admit to a certain amount of, like, anxiety when it comes to reading theoretical texts. Because sometimes you do feel like you're reading in the dark in a movie theater and you have no idea, like, you need, where's the light? Someone shine some light on what Laura Mulvey is telling me. But the beautiful part of being a writer and a researcher, I think, is feeling like you're part of a group of people who are all, you know, striving towards meaning all at the same time. You know, we're not always, you know, talking at the same time. We do take turns in these settings, but I love that kind of, it's like a beautiful metaphor for what research is, that it's about the collective. But I do want to keep moving along, so I wonder if Natasha wants to come up and do her part. I can't remember which section you're translating. Oh, yes. Excellent.
This is the first chapter, beginning of the first chapter of, and it's called To Be and Not to Be. I checked. In 2011, I was hired as an ATER, temporary teaching and research assistant, in the film department of the University of Lyon 2 on the Bronn campus. I was to teach several courses, including a lecture series on general aesthetics. In my memory, the lecture theatre was enormous. To get there, I had to go down what seemed like thousands of stairs. I can still picture the students, a row of dark silhouettes, sitting frozen behind their computers. I was terrified. I had no idea how to move, how to address those faces, how to look at them. I had no idea how to speak to them. My voice never managed to adapt to this setup. Given the size of the hall, 2 solutions presented themselves. Either I spoke into the microphone, positioned on the desk a great distance away, obliging me practically to lie across it and leading to all sorts of other problems. Or I gave up on the microphone and relied solely on my own authority, which was what I did. I had the impression that I was incapable of reaching the students unless I spoke extremely loudly, practically shouted. As the weeks went by, my voice stopped working. Not a sound came out of my mouth. I made an appointment in Paris, near Gobelin, with a speech therapist. She taught me how to breathe deep into my abdomen and stop abusing my vocal cords. I carried on teaching in Lyon until the end of the academic year, when I left to go and teach in an art school. It hadn't occurred to me until that point that my voice was going to be my work tool. I started to listen, to really hear voices, the way they can be there and then disappear, the way they reflect our frailties. This discovery made me as sensitive to the pauses and stammerings of voices as to the moments when they flow, when it seems like nothing can stop them. I began to tap into these interruptions, these vocal pauses that aren't always intentional. In Faces in the Crowd, Mexican novelist Valeria Luiselli portrays a writer with 2 young children. In Mexico, in a house that's slowly falling into ruin, she's trying to write a book. Behind her back, her architect husband reads the pages she's written, surreptitiously keeping an eye on her, while her son pesters her incessantly about what she's doing. She's never left in peace. She's constantly having to stop, put her writing on hold. This interruption is at the heart of the book. The continuous flow that writing demands is irreparably impeded, complicated by things as practical and routine as they are phantasmatic. Novels need a sustained breath, writes the narrator. That's what novelists want. No one knows exactly what it means, but they all say, a sustained breath. I have a baby and a boy. They don't let me breathe. Everything I write has to be in short bursts. I'm short of breath. Her voice gets lost in the twists and turns of the narrative. Among the themes explored in the novel, I began to take note of the pauses that she's forced to establish between herself and her project. I look at how she begins to accept being interrupted, the frustration it engenders, but also how the desire to return to writing surpasses the frustration. I understand that it's the interruption that generates the impulse, the pulse, the expectation, the impatience. As I read on, I notice how the characters who replace or duplicate the narrator multiply. She is, simultaneously, a mother, a young childless woman, a writer, an editor in New York, a translator, and then she also steps into the shoes of the poet she's translating. So when the narrator's writing has to be put on hold, we follow her in other ways as she invents the other lives, other characters, other voices. And these identities dissolve into one another. It occurs to me that the fact of being constantly interrupted leads to as many solutions as it does problems.
Thank you. Should I read too? No, it's okay. No? You want me to read? I look at Isabelle always. I can't believe I wrote these lines before I got my daughter. But maybe I wouldn't write it today like that. Okay, what should I write? Ok. Un autre passage ou le même passage? Le même passage. Ok. En 2011, je suis recrutée comme ATER, attaché temporaire d'enseignement et de recherche, à l'université de Lyon 2 sur le campus de Bron, dans un département de cinéma. Il y a beaucoup de cours différents à donner, dont un d'esthétique générale qui se déroule en amphi. Dans mon souvenir, cet amphi était immense. Pour y accéder, il fallait descendre ce qui me semblait être des milliers de marches. Je revois les étudiants, une succession de silhouettes sombres figées derrière des ordinateurs. J'étais terrorisée. Je ne savais pas comment bouger, comment m'adresser à ces visages, comment les regarder. Je ne savais pas comment leur parler non plus. Ma voix n'a jamais réussi à s'adapter à cette configuration. Étant donné la taille de l'amphi, 2 solutions s'offraient à moi. Soit je parlais dans un micro qui était placé très très loin sur le bureau, m'obligeant quasiment à me coucher dessus et à me casser le dos, soit je renonçais au micro et je ne comptais que sur mes propres forces, ce que j'ai fait. J'avais l'impression que j'étais incapable d'atteindre les étudiants sans parler vraiment fort, crier presque. De semaine en semaine, ma voix s'est progressivement détraquée. Plus aucun son ne sortait de ma bouche. J'ai pris rendez-vous à Paris avec une orthophoniste à côté des Gobelins. Elle m'a appris à respirer par le ventre, à cesser de maltraiter mes cordes vocales. J'ai enseigné à Lyon jusqu'à la fin de l'année, puis j'ai quitté l'université pour une école d'art. Jusque-là, il ne m'était jamais venu à l'esprit que ma voix serait mon outil de travail.
Thank you. The section that Natasha read from and that you've just read from as well is one that speaks really clearly to the relationship between the body and the voice and the way that the body can, limit what we can do with the voice or amplify. It's a source of fragility and of power. I wonder, there are quite a few sections in the book in which your own body kind of makes an interruption in the text. You write about an MRI, IVF, well, possible IVF, endometriosis, pregnancy. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the body and the voice and your own body interrupting the text. Maybe they're not interruptions. Maybe that's the real text.
No, that's of course, that's an important point, I think. Obviously, I have this complicated relationship with my own body, and also the discovery in the course of writing that I had this chronic disease called endometriosis, which I had never heard of before, has had an impact on the writing itself, of course, not just because I had this problem of getting pregnant, but also because obviously the writer I was reading and the thing I was reading progressively began to shift towards the way these writers describe also their own body and the way it very simply is an incredible empowerment place, and at the same time a place of fragility. I mean, and this is exactly what writing is in the end of the day. So there was this obvious link for me between writing and the way I was looking at myself. And I think voice, in a way, was just a vehicle, a way to tell this story, quite simply.
That's really interesting. So the voice is a way to tell the story of your body.
I think, yeah. Because it's also a way to fantasize it. I mean, voice is immaterial also. Well, so it's also a way to get out of your own body, even when it doesn't work anymore, when it doesn't work well, when it's dysfunctional. You still can have a phone discussion with someone when you're in the fond de votre lit, in your bed and very ill, I mean, in a very bad state or situation. Your voice can still reach someone. And I'm a strong believer in phone discussion. I mean, I still have very long and phone discussion, and because I love voices, of course. So I'm not very good at texting, for example, but I'm good at listening to discussion on the phone. And at several occasions, I was absolutely amazed by the fact that I could have a long discussion on the phone when or while I wasn't well, like almost ill. And my voice could play with that. My voice could use that almost, and it was okay. And this kind of disruption, or I don't know how to describe it, but this kind of double bind was, I don't know why and how, but very close to what writing is for me. So yes, that's what I would say.
Okay, I think this is a good point, because we're going to come into questions of irritation and shanai and the affective and the physical. So I'm going to call Jenny up to tell us about irritation.
So yes, I'm going to read from the beginning of the section called Irritation Becoming a Heroine. Bordeaux. I crossed the Place Saint-Michel in the rain, listening to Nathalie Quintane on France Culture. She thinks we need to get over the idea that literature is there to save us, to heal us or repair us. She says, as the world falls flat on its face and we become increasingly troubled, unsettled, worried, nervous and stressed, literature, just like self-help or self-coaching books, is seen as a personal private aid to feeling better. I'm not saying that can't be one of its roles, but I think it shouldn't just be that. Being enclosed in a kind of contemplative, consolatory meditation kills. It kills us and it kills literature too. Hearing her slightly tense acerbic voice, I backtracked to the start of my research. The idea of irritation as a motif came to me when I was thinking about her books and the effects they produce. The subjects she tackles and the atmospheres she creates allow Nathalie Quintane to construct a form that is irritated, located between contained anger and a kind of humour or irony that works at the surface of the sentence itself. When this idea is put to work, the result is an apt depiction of the contemporary situation, unsatisfying and rather brooding, treading water but trying to make something out of that stasis. I like this translation of annoyance into a literary form. Irritation is the subject of some of Nathalie Quintane's work, as is the way in which the rough edges of spoken language impinge on the regularity of the written word. In 2006, Quintane was interviewed about her book Cavale, meaning escape. The journalist asks her if escape is a solution to depression, and she answers, no, if there is an element of escape, then, as I've said, it's more that ideas are escaping. But yes, if we want to escape in the literal sense, it might also be because our ideas are escaping. It's a response to the current atmosphere, which everyone talks about but can't pin down. She's then asked if she's referring to the current political situation. No, mine. I mean, it comes from the bizarre conversations I sometimes have with my friends about all this. We've turned 40, we're well educated, but sometimes it feels worse than the whole Villepin-Sarkozy business. It's like a complete mental swamp, a struggle to think through the before, the after, the during. But I think it's the time that suits me in terms of ideas escaping. I recognise this fog of confusion because it's something that has dogged me for years. Nothing's certain. Several times in my professional life, I've thought that I should learn to swallow my anger. I observe and experiment with the extent to which my publicly manifested anger is difficult, even impossible for people to accept, and I feel isolated by it. Separated. To swallow one's feelings, stifle or repress, swallow one's saliva due to emotion, anxiety or hesitation, but especially take in as if by swallowing. A response to the current atmosphere, Quintane says, irritation is formless, but it makes us itch. It's always making its presence felt, establishing itself inside us. Swallowed down and interiorized, it struggles to find its voice. Even though anger provides an immediate, effective outlet, I'm choosing irritation here. Less fertile, maybe, but more unifying. More muted and odorless, it infects like a virus. Irritation, it seems to me, is more shareable than anger.
I'm going to read just what is 2 pages after what you read. Je décide de laisser une place à cette inflammation oratoire un peu rentrée, qui peine à trouver sa forme, qui tombe souvent à l'eau. Je commence à collecter ces moments où les discours s'enflamment. Le cinéma et la littérature récente m'offrent des exemples intéressants. Mais une fois que l'on y est attentif, la vie de tous les jours déborde littéralement de ces situations, justement bien plus fortes que des exemples, qui sont comme gorgés de détails, de textures, de mots et de gestes qui tissent l'irritation. Mes discussions téléphoniques avec des amis demeurent le meilleur poste d'observation possible pour la mesurer. Ces échanges s'agrippent à un quotidien incroyablement pris de vitesse. Les récits de vie qui tentent de maintenir les projets professionnels, les situations amoureuses, les voyages, les enfants, la maison, tout ensemble. À plusieurs reprises, en raccrochant, je regrette de ne pas avoir enregistré ces échanges. Ils sont l'image la plus aboutie de vie traversée par l'agacement, l'énervement et les déceptions, et qui, avec humour, renverse la vapeur, refuse les fatalités. Il en résulte souvent l'impression que ces personnages féminins bien réels, ceux qui m'entourent, sont de véritables héroïnes, championnes de l'organisation autant que du chaos, et que leur capacité à raconter ou mettre en relation les épisodes épars de leur quotidien relève d'une qualité littéraire. Le facteur de liaison entre ces épisodes, c'est l'irritation, qui vient écorner les transitions, qui chahute et complique une simple et languide acceptation des difficultés. L'irritation les rend exigeantes, acérées, énervées, capables de demander des comptes. C'est cette capacité de dramatisation qui m'intéresse car elle équivaut à une mise en récit. J'en tire la conclusion temporaire que l'irritation fait de nous des héroïnes.
I love that. Irritation makes us heroines.
I think it's true.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's wonderful. I mean, I think that section, if I'm remembering correctly, unless I'm confusing with another one, where you're talking about Sarah Ahmed and the feminist Killjoy, you know, I think there's what Jenny was reading was a little bit at the beginning about the right to be angry and how we have to kind of fight not to swallow our anger but to speak it. But then, you know, with Sean Nye or you know, Lauren Berlant, you focus on the kind of productivity of like irritation, of the minor feeling or the ugly feeling. And so I like the Feminist Killjoy because it's like there's even something joyful about anger, but the Killjoy is doing something else. It's like she's just kind of irritated. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about this ethos of irritation, feminist ethos.
I was so happy when I found the term irritation. I think it was because I was myself angry with my own angriness. Now, how do you say that? So I think I was angry at myself for being always angry. So when I found irritation, I think I found a way out. I mean, I found at least a way to describe anger, and it's linked to what I was saying at the beginning. I mean, if the book is about separation, if the book is about, obviously it's also about revenge. I mean, it's the Kill Bill book in a way. I mean, of course, I dream that someone maybe is going to read that book one day. So it's about revenge in a way. So I think anger and being angry and accepting the fact to be angry is a way to tell my story and to tell, I think, other stories too, in a way to. And I mean, irritation was a good. That's exactly what Jenny was reading. I mean, irritation is a way to. I don't know how do you say federate, but get together, different kinds of angriness, and. But on the literary side, I mean, really the capacity to tell a story that would take angriness at the beginning, at the core of a literary ambition, and how do you say déplier? To unfold. To unfold what is at the core of angriness. And I think the word irritation for me was like, okay, that's a good way. That's a good way to revenge in a way. I don't know.
And yeah, it connects up to this idea of the female voice as necessarily having to be kind of, you know, mellifluous and calming and soothing, and, you know, it's making room for the, you know, la voix rauque.
And I must add that I had been, because, of course, as I was angry, and very much angry, I remember special moments of meetings in the professional situations where I could see, for example, the director of an art school looking at me, seeing that I was going to be angry, and just, you know, this moment where, ça y est, il recommence, you're feeling me coming, like, oh my God, she's coming. Just trying to describe this moment where a man sees a woman coming, and what is that moment? What's the deal? That's a beautiful moment. I love that moment. I love these moments.
So then I'll just have one last question, and then I think we can open it out to whoever else might have things that they want to talk about. So when I said before that I thought this was a really madcap idea, I think what I was hearing was the echo in English of Zizanies, which I hear as zany, but I know that's not at all what Zizanies means in French. Zany's like madcap. It's like crazy in a funny way. It's like, you know, to my native English-speaking ear, Zizanies sounds crazy. But it's not actually. I don't know if you want to maybe unpack a little bit, and then I can. What does Zizanies mean for you?
I think, frankly, when we chose, I say we because I don't want to bear the weight of the choice of this title. Because Thomas is here, so he can say. But no, frankly, the reason for Zizanies was we were very happy and very lucky to find this etymological way of looking at Zizanies, which is bad seeds in Greek. Bad seeds. Yeah. So obviously, and of course, all these women voices that I was gathering from the beginning of this research could be seen as bad seeds. And for me, that was perfect. But what I really liked about Zizanies is the sound of it. I mean, the sound, the double Z, which is not, it's rare in French. You don't find it quite easily. I love the fact that it's feminine plural too, that it's about something about collective. And I also like the way that for me it was like the name of a country or a place, you know. I'm going to Zizanies. I mean, it was also a region, a place to hide or to, you know. So it was. And in the end, of course, what the words mean in French is this troublemaker, no? This way of, that's, in French you have this expression of saying le grain de sable. And women often ajoutent leur grain de sable. You know, in French it's this way of saying that women just...
We have to add our grain of sand, you know, or a grain of salt, I think we would probably say.
Yeah, so of course choosing Zizanies was also a way to choose trouble and to stay with the trouble. Like Haraway says, it was a choice also. It was the choice to stick and stay with the trouble and not try to reconcile or resolve it, you know, and to find a solution that would be peaceful and soothing for everyone, so that we can speak and hear each other and in the place where nothing exists like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So in the end, it's a more, I would say it's both, it would be between Donna Haraway and maybe my known cousin Clara Schulmann, something about conflict also. No, but Zizanies is also the way to choose conflict and to say, yes, of course, obviously there are conflicts and let's talk about that. So irritation and all these kind of bad moods and bad seeds and bad behaviors that voices carry with them, no? It was also to say, okay, let's talk about that. Let's not talk about reconciliation, because this is not going to happen. But let's say how and why conflict is important in a way, because it gathers people, you know, like complaint, no?
Yeah, completely. Okay, well, I think that's a good point at which to open it out. Are there questions, comments, complaints, irritations? I think there are microphones coming around. Please don't be shy. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking. I'll start telling you all the French words I can think of that have double Z's.
If not, I would actually have a question. Maybe for one of the translators here. As a translator, how do you do to find your own voice in relationship with the text that is already autonomous from the author, but also in relationship to the author? How do you do to find your own voice, if anyone wants to answer?
Actually, I don't know why I looked so enthusiastic, because now I feel slightly nervous. I don't think you do try to find your own voice. I mean, I think that's what you're trying to do. I mean, I have so many images for translation in my head. So the one that I kind of feel most fondly about is that it's like you work on this text and it's like your baby. But it's not your baby, it's somebody else's baby, but you're sharing the parenthood of this baby, and then at some point you want the text, you have to be able to let go. You have to be able to let go of the hand of this child and let it go out into the world. It's not yours, it's not your voice, but it's also, I mean, I think you can't help, oh God, I can't really answer this actually. I think we'll see it when the book comes out, and we'll see how differently the chapters sound and whether or not they really do, as you say, have a distinct voice. I mean, I feel like it's not my voice at all, it's your voice, but it's sort of refracted through my words that I've chosen. It's an incredibly complicated thing, but I definitely don't think I've translated books voiced by American men in the early 20th century. That's definitely not my voice. And that's sort of an extreme version, because in this case, you really are working with a first-person non-fiction writer, so it's easier to think that it could be your voice. But actually, that really isn't what you're doing when you're translating. But it is a kind of magic that I don't think I can really explain better than that.
But hearing you reading it was magic, actually, because it was really your voice. So it's not that easy, I think. And that's what I was thinking, listening to you, is that the use I make of the first person has always been in my mind. Of course, that's me. But I mean, the experiences I tell and the stories I tell are not that personal in a way. So I've always thought of that first person as something how would you say, empruntable, borrowable, that you can borrow, no?
But I think that's sort of why I always think of it as a child, because it's sort of yours and it's not yours, as
like a surrogate,
as the cliche goes, which I won't quote. But it isn't, it doesn't belong to you, but it somehow comes from you, but it's an individual apart from you, and the thing that you have to give it is the right to be out in the world apart from you. But that's the same thing for a writer, so...
Yeah, but we do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's exactly...
I think it's a question of timbre, to be more precise about voice and how the voice sounds and how voices come across. Like, it's like maybe a song, like you're singing the song that she wrote, but with your timbre. And I mean, I think that because I've been badly translated in French and been like, this is not my book. Like, what? Who wrote that?
But isn't that sometimes because somebody's enforced their voice onto your book?
Yeah, completely, yeah. But it's always going to be their voice. It's just their voice is like drowning out whatever I wrote. It's like a different song. Like I didn't write that song. But so the translation, I think, is like more like an interpretation of a song for me, with someone else's timbre, I guess, basically the tone of their voice or the how the voice is constituted. And that's why it's so great to read different. Like different versions of Proust or different versions of Flaubert. And different versions of Schulmann. Jenny, I don't know if you want to jump in.
No, I mean, I think I would really agree with you, Natasha, that I don't think about my voice. I suppose my kind of metaphor that I often think of translation, I suppose you always have one, is that it's like singing in a choir when you're just watching the conductor and really just absorbing and trying, and you're doing something yourself in a quite a sort of accomplished way, but it's really coming from somewhere else as well. And I suppose it's not a voice, but maybe it's a response, which is of course different between me and you and all of us. And yeah, definitely not trying to create a voice, but I do know that if you translated my chapter, it would be totally different, wouldn't it? So there's something there, but when that happens, when it becomes my response, is really, really difficult to pin down, but it's there somewhere.
Other questions, concerns, viewpoints, songs? Someone? Yeah.
I'd like to follow your question about citing, Lauren, and the way, Clara, that you draw a lot of voices together in the book, and actually listening to Jenny speak there. I think, the idea of sort of conducting a chorus and bringing together these French female writers and English writers, and kind of how that was as a process, combining friends' voices and the work of other writers and critics. Sort of how your writing process went.
I think, I don't know how to say that. It was in a way, it was very conversational. I mean, the conversation I was having very simply with friends was more or less the same I had with these writers I was deciding to quote at one point, or with these artists I was discussing with. So it was more like building a very horizontal desk, where all these persons, and many of them are dead actually. I mean, I was also conversing with dead people, and that was okay. I mean, at one point, dealing with voices is also a way to build this kind of imaginary community. And what I liked about it was really the idea that my best friend Lila could be conversing with Virginia Woolf. I mean, for me, it was like heaven. It was perfect. So, and this was conversational in a way that it had also this kind of, it was also a social way of bringing these voices together, because it was more like organizing. But maybe Thomas could say a few things about the way we in the end tried to organize the whole thing. But I don't know. My answer would be a kind of imaginary community, and very ordinary people meeting big stars. I don't know. And also in the middle of it, and which is not such a detail, teaching, because teaching was also at the core of the whole process, and I couldn't forget about that because it's also where I heard my voice for the first time. I mean, teaching was just the moment where I heard myself speaking and say, "Oh my God, well, how can I just speak that like that?" And the text I'm mentioning and the writers I quote were also the text accompanying in a way or another what I was teaching and the thing I was reading with my students at one point. And it was always very simple to describe my life. I mean, finishing a course, just having a phone discussion because I'm in Bordeaux with my sister, and going to my gynecologist to deal with this or that question. It was just describing that was one of the goals. I don't know how to say that.
Une autre question?
Yeah, I have a question about voices, because the voices, I haven't read your book, I'm sorry, but it's not ready. But when you mentioned voices, it's sort of intellectual voices. It's what the people are telling, what they have to tell. But how is your reaction to voice as voice? For example, we heard these 3 readings with a completely different voice. And how is your reaction to it? Because I reacted very differently to the 3 voices I heard.
But for me, I don't know how to say that. It's very strange. Of course, that's the first time I hear my own text in English, so I was a bit taken by that. But at the same time, it feels absolutely natural to hear different persons with their voices and their different inflections. I don't know how and their different tonalities and their different tempos. Reading the text is exactly what the book is about. So I don't know how to be more precise than that. I mean, these differences of texture and these differences of nuances and the way Natasha amplified one moment and less another, the way Jenny, that's exactly what the book is about. So this difference of inflections, or the way the voice decides to breathe at one point and just let the sound get out in a way, and I'm very bad at saying all this in English, but it seems absolutely obvious. I don't know how to answer more. That's the whole thing.
Thank you. Yes, it's wonderful because this whole event is giving me more ideas. First of all, I don't think I'm going to edit everybody as much as I thought I would be to unify, because there was this idea that, we were going to unify the voices without somehow losing each translator's character. And I think that's defunct. That is not going to work. There's going to be proofreading, and that's it. So great for me. And then I'm just even wondering whether we should actually even make a book. Like, should it be an audiobook rather than there's a huge. It should be both. Yes, well, I'm going to need more money then. But I think yes, it would lend itself very well to that. So I look forward to it even more.
I agree with everything that Cécile wants to do, because for us at Paraguay, it's such a proof of recognition and honor that Les Fugitives have decided to translate the Zizanies in English. So, and I don't think it's a bad idea at all. I think one way to say it's like, I had a wonderful time working with Clara as the editor of the book. And it was very inspiring conversation over years, because it took like maybe 2 years from the moment we decided to do this book, or even from the first draft to the end of the book. So it was a very nice conversation, very nice time, very stimulating. So, and I love the idea that, you know, more people will, the more the merrier, the more conversations will be about this book between the different translators and Cécile and Clara. I think it's fantastic, both for Clara and for everyone involved. And then there was one last thing I wanted to say about the idea of like the collective translation, and but I can't remember what it is now. Yes. But another thing that, you know, made me think that it was maybe the best idea for this book. Yeah, no, of course, it's the fact that the book had to be. This is the one thing that the French book could not be, and I'm not saying that a translation of a book is a lesser version of that book, but it's clearly a different project. It's a different book, but with the collective translation, is really the one thing that we couldn't have done in French. Voilà.
We have thrown down the gauntlet for the other countries and their other translations. See what you can do with that, Italy. Anyway, thank you all for coming. I think we'll leave it at that. And, you know, was there another one? Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't see. Please, one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
But I guess we'll
be
you
hanging
kind of
around. Sorry?
Hinted at my question already, but I'll still ask it. And I actually have a question for Cécile. Hi, I'm calling you by your first name, although I don't know you. But you said when you went to the pedestal that it was the only way that this text could have been translated with the community of voices, which I think is a really interesting idea. And I wanted to ask if you could elaborate a bit about that. If you felt like this was the only way to translate it because it does speak about the plurality of voices, or because it also is based on in a sense, community of writers and authors and, you know, thinkers that are quoted and cited in the work. So I'm just curious because I felt like it was an interesting thought. And tied to that was the question that you hinted at, which was if you were to translate it in other languages, would you kind of replicate the same concept? And would it be the same if it's in a language that you don't speak? Because as much as you say you don't speak great English, you speak perfect English, in the sense that it's subtle and people can understand it and the subtleties of what you're saying. If you were to translate the book in, I suspect you don't speak, I don't know, Japanese, would would it be the same? Would you want the same process, and would it be the same engagement? I'm just very curious about all those. So.
What I can say about that, I think your question is very interesting, and I really hope that my book could be translated into Japanese. That's a very good horizon to think of. But no, more seriously, what I think is that Cécile's idea is brilliant because it's linked to English. And obviously, for so many reasons, my book engaged in a large and deep discussion with English literature and critical thinking as it is made here and published here and in the United States. So, for example, there aren't so many French writers in the book, to be clear, because I don't have this kind of proximity, I think. And so what I would be interested in would be how Zizanies would react in another country with other coordinates. And I mean, Cécile's idea is site-specific. That's what I like about it. It's site-specific to English context and situation. And that's why I think it's so clever. And it's site-specific to the way I worked on this project. But there are other site specificity in other countries, I'm sure, and there are other forms to invent. I don't know if this collective form would fit a Japanese translation or a German translation, But I think there are other ways to imagine it. I don't know how to say it in English, but to add a collective what was your word, Laetitia? Sinus. I've learned a new word today. Grâce à Laetitia was here. And it comes from Brian Eno, and it's this idea of sinus. Versus genius. Exactly, you knew that, of course. How could you knew that? And sinus, and that's exactly what this dream team of translator is. It's a sinus, right? But it's Laetitia's idea. It's not mine. You know, I love quoting, so that's not
a good title.
Yeah, sinus. So this sinus thing is really linked to English language and the way it works also here. I mean, quotes and the conversation who's engaged here and in the States, and in the English language, rooted in the English language. Of course, for me being here today in the streets of London as a French writer, I've been thinking of Virginia Woolf and stuff like that. I mean, it's obvious, because that's what I've been thinking all along while writing this book. I don't have this kind of thought when I work in Paris, or it's you see. So, I don't know if I answered your question, and Cécile has to answer the first one.
Well, very briefly, I think the answer to your question was in your question, at least a very big part of it. So I'm not going to repeat what you said, because you said it very well. There were practical constraints in this project that I took on. You know, no one told me, go and do this book, okay? I kind of fell in love, intellectually speaking, with the book. And then I thought, you know, got to do it. Someone's got to do it. And that's often how I choose books, you know. Someone's got to do it, and it's got to be me. So, but this time, instead of wanting to be on my own with one translator, it became necessary for, you know, I'm not going to explain the whole reasoning. There's like trade secrets kind of thing. But it became necessary to engage with other people. And to have, as one of you two said, the more the merrier. When you bring in a new voice in an Anglophone country, a foreign voice who's just barely known in their own country, or you know, marginally known, as Clara is, you want as many people to surround yourself with as many people as you can to talk for her, with her, about her. And that's also what the project was about. And the shape of the book lends itself beautifully to that. Not just the structure of the book, but le propos, the point of it, you know, with all those different voices intersecting it, you know, disturbing it. So, yeah, okay.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think we'll all be kind of milling about for a little while if you have any questions. But I want to congratulate Clémence on a very wonderful, wonderful week of happenings and events. And you should check out the other events that are happening, you know, all during the rest of the week. And thank you all for coming out here tonight. Thank you all for tuning in at home. Thank you, Clara and Thomas, for coming. Everybody, the readers, this has been lovely. So with that, I leave you to your Zizanies.